with the House Democrats on offense, hitting hard against the Trump team's efforts of what they call stonewalling these open obstruction probes, plus the new release of a voicemail that reveals Donald Trump's own lawyer, criminal defense lawyer, trying to get a heads up on whether Michael Flynn had, quote, evidence that would implicate the president. Well, Democrats are pressing ahead on their aggressive plans in all of this as they face what they call the stonewalling, because they're going to hold both Attorney General Barr and former White House counsel Don McGahn in contempt. And that's not all. There's this new report here that they're going to grant other committee chairs the power to go to federal court to enforce any subpoenas. That could be the Mueller report. It could be evidence from Barr. It could be future subpoenas. So it's another way that we're seeing the escalation of this interbranch war, even as there's a larger question over whether the impeachment questions, the impeachment debate is winding up or winding down. Now, here's a clip, also new. Speaker Pelosi, she's dialing up her rhetoric, telling senior Democrats that while she may not be for impeachment now, she wants to see Donald Trump in prison. Pelosi showing that was it unlikely that impeachment is coming anytime soon. She is the House Speaker. She controls whether that would become real. She wants Democrats to focus on some sort of longer-term alternative. You have the Justice Department policy that you cannot indict a sitting president. We've heard a lot about that. That's also being contested. 2020 Dems are running against that. And then, separate from whether they repeal that policy, if a Democrat does defeat Trump, what you have here is the Speaker of the House openly suggesting that after his presidency, maybe he should be prosecuted, maybe he should be jailed. That is tough talk. Trump responding in kind on a Fox News interview. This was part of the war cemetery discussion, part of the Normandy 75th that we've been covering today. Take a look at this.
Nancy Pelosi, I call her Nervous Nancy. Nancy Pelosi doesn't talk about it. Nancy Pelosi's a disaster, okay? She's a disaster. And let her do what she wants. You know what? I think they're in big trouble.
Of course, if the Democrats are in big trouble, that raises the question of why the Trump administration and the White House are stonewalling in the first place. Why not just get this over with and provide the witnesses? Now, in the Mueller report, you have evidence of potential parts of obstruction. And you have, as we reported previously, the discussion of what Trump's lawyer said when dealing with former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's lawyer. Now, this was in a very stressful, hot time, November 2017. Reports are out that Flynn was going to leave his joint defense agreement and make a deal with Mueller. Now, today, for the very first time, that voicemail is out. Now, we knew about this because it's part of Mueller's evidence. Now you can hear it for the very first time.
Hey, Rob. This is John again. Maybe I'm sympathetic. I understand your situation, but let me see if I can't state it in stronger terms. It wouldn't surprise me if you've gone on to make a deal and work with the government. If, on the other hand, there's information that implicates the president, then we've got a national security issue. We need some kind of heads up. Remember what we've always said about the president and his feeling toward Flynn. That still remains.
I'm joined by the Center for American Progress Action Fund's Juanita Tolliver, Daily Beast Margaret Carlson, and TheRoot.com's Jason Johnson. Good evening to all of you. Margaret, you've been covering a lot of these different characters over the years. Rarely do you get that kind of a private recording. What do you read from it? What do you hear in the atmosphere? As I mentioned, we knew the outlines from the report.
We did, but hearing it like that, it's chilling. It sounds like something that could be in The Sopranos, where you say, you were our friend, but you might not be our friend anymore, and it would create a national security issue. All of the times that the White House has tried to dangle favors, pardons, anything to keep people silent is a disgrace. And now they're doing it by ignoring subpoenas and forcing Democrats in this case. And I don't think they need to do it through impeachment. I think the tools that Democrats need are available to them by other means, through the Judiciary Committee, through oversight committees, to use the contempt method if they don't. If that's how they have to enforce the subpoenas against people who are really not under Trump's control anymore. Don McGahn had his heroic moment, as you're reading the Mueller report, and I assume he would testify. But he's been intimidated by Trump into not testifying. The same with Hope Hicks. So we have to hope there's a branch of government left. The Senate is amoral, not going to do anything. Don't count on them. They're never going to impeach. But that the judicial branch, there are judges who will still do the right thing.
Wanting to take a listen to Senator Warren.
Donald Trump, as president, delayed, deflected, moved, fired, and did everything he could to obstruct justice. If he were any other person in the United States, based on what's documented in that report, he would be carried out in handcuffs.
Is this the new Democratic message, instead of them actually doing what one would do if you thought someone should be carried out in handcuffs, which is go forward with the congressional remedies? Senator Warren is at least consistent because she has come out for impeachment. If Nancy Pelosi believes this is criminal conduct justifying jail, then doesn't it justify an impeachment probe?
Well, I think what Nancy Pelosi's strategy here is ultimately, let's be strategic, let's get it right the first time, because once you open that floodgate with impeachment proceedings, there is no taking it back. And what Pelosi is fully aware of is that, sure, there might be success in the House, but the Senate is a graveyard, as we've seen for any bit of positive legislation that House Democrats have put up. Mitch McConnell has made it very clear they're all DOA. The other thing about Senator Warren's statement that really springs true is no one is above the law. And that includes President Trump.
So let me
even though he is obstructing. Yeah.
Let me press you on that, because you're in Washington, you're dialed in. I'm not saying Cap is the same as Speaker Pelosi. We'll invite her on as well. But
Definitely do that.
As you articulate some of the analysis of the rationale, doesn't the counter argument become, is this the Democrats' version of lock her up? I mean, there was a judicial legal process. We've covered it extensively. It did not result in an indictment, whether you like it or not. The next step would be, does Congress want to deal with it? And if the Speaker doesn't want to go that route, she has every right to explain that. But if she doesn't want to go that route and then she is making prison-esque, jail-esque references, does she risk, I ask for your analysis, does she risk getting close to a lock-her-up kind of frame where you're using the impugning of criminal conduct without actually responsibly dealing with the evidence?
Well, I think going back to what you said about whether or not she wants to deal with it, I think she is dealing with it. I think she's just not moving as quickly as some would want, because she's outlined that the premises in which and the conditions in which she would like to move forward is with, one, a lot more buy-in from the general public and awareness, and two, some bipartisan support. So I think she's dealing with it as they ramp up committee chairmen and women's ability to file suits against people who and hold people in contempt of Congress who choose to not appear and abide by subpoenas. So it's being handled. It's just not being handled in a way that I think with the urgency that a lot of people want to see.
Jason, do you see a risk here of this turning into lock him up?
Yes, and it's just as silly, Ari, as lock him up, because it's also a chant that they're not willing to go through with. Everybody knows that Donald Trump really wasn't going to try and lock up Hillary Clinton. And essentially what you have Nancy Pelosi saying is, we have a monster here, and you can use holy water and you can use garlic, but don't use the silver bullet. Even though we got him in the chamber, literally in our chamber, the House chamber, we're not going to use the silver bullet that's at our disposal. It doesn't make any sense, and it makes her leadership sound weak. Look, I'm down here right now. I just saw a speech by Maxine Waters. She led the entire audience in a chant of impeach 45. The base wants to see this process. Nancy Pelosi is speaking against her own base and speaking against her own leadership at this point. There is no strategy behind it. It's certainly not one that a lot of people are agreeing with.
Juanita, you wanted to get in?
Yeah, I'm saying she's just saying, let's not jump to that silver bullet yet. There are still some foundational things that need to happen here. And so she's just moving strategically.
No, that's not strategic. Because
Jason,
if she
and then
says,
Margaret.
well, we're not going to. Yeah, if she says, well, we can't do it until the Senate happens and we can't do it until we get the public involved, every single logical person who knows anything about history is saying you can't get the public involved until you begin impeachment proceedings. We don't have to go back and repeat the whole Nixon rule again. You can't get the public involved. She is constantly moving the goalposts in ways that don't make sense to anybody. You can still impeach him without him being removed. That's the Senate's problem. And putting them on the line and making Republicans have to say right before an election year, this is why I want to keep a president who is engaging in possibly illegal activities in office. That's the greatest campaign slogan you can have for 2020, and she's denying that to this country.
Hearings that are televised will get public buy-in. The
Exactly.
idea, but I think those hearings can be done, the Judiciary Committee hearings, Oversight Committee hearings. Look what Trump did with the Mueller report. He exonerated himself. He had the help of William Barr, who's, you know, this is the part of the movie where you find out that the police captain is on the take. So Barr did everything he could to help Trump make that case. So the public, or at least a portion of it, thinks that Trump was found innocent by the Mueller report. He said no collusion and I was exonerated. Imagine what he'll do if the Senate relieves him of impeachment. If it doesn't convict him of impeachment, what he will do with that. He will have been a martyr and he will declare himself innocent. And that will not help anybody. If you know that that adds, I mean, it makes it worse for Democrats going into the election to have Trump have that in his pocket.
Yeah, that's not going to be in his pocket. He's going to say that no matter what. Donald Trump has been caught doing all sorts of inappropriate activities, and he will still exonerate himself. And if you want to talk about the dirty police chief, here's what we learned from all cop films, right? The Departed. If you take too long, the hero ends up dead. Right? They end up dead at the end of the movie because they weren't aggressive enough when they needed to be. Right. This doesn't have to be about what Donald Trump is. This is about what the constitutional responsibilities are of the House, what the constitutional responsibilities are of the Senate. This sort of tepid nonsense on the part of Democrats, well, we can't do this because Trump is going to flip it another way. Has no one been paying attention to this guy for the last 3 years? He will make up and lie.
I thought what we learned from The
Jason,
Departed, I thought in The Departed we learned that if you have the top floor apartment in the best building in Massachusetts, it doesn't make sense on a cop salary. I'm going to go.
Exactly. There's that, too.
As moderator, I'm going to go Juanita and then Margaret, and then we're out of time.
Yeah, I honestly think, with all the Departed analogies aside, there is some value to the fact that the public needs to be bought in here. And I'm talking about, sure, the echo chamber of Twitter is loud. You got progressive folks on the left really pushing here. But Pelosi sees the big picture, and I think we got to stay the course.
So if you can fast forward and see that impeachment only emboldens Trump and makes him stronger, would you still be for impeachment?
It won't do that, so I'm in favor of it.
I'm asking my friend Jason.
Yeah, it's not going to embolden him because he's emboldened anyway. So you should go ahead with impeachment.
There's more emboldenment in him. Look at him on D-Day, you know, taking after.
This is who the president's going to be.
Completely uncouth.
Well, I'm going to fit in a break because we have so much in this show. What I appreciate is such a fulsome, no-holds-barred exchange of views with people having very different ideas about what to do next on a central constitutional question. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.